All right, so I want to say hello to everyone listening and welcome to Downloadable Culture, or DLC for short. I'm Skill, and I'm joined by my much better looking and far more charismatic co-host, the great Houdini.
It's hard to follow up with that now that I have all the nasally voices from being a little sick, but
Yes,
yes, hello everybody.
that's how great we are. We're both sick, but we're both here bringing the information.
Absolutely.
So in case anyone missed the previous episode, we're just a couple average guys who have an interest in politics and you could say a passion for people. We've noticed how the system is failing everybody in some way, shape, or form, so we decided to sit down and discuss the state of the world. And what we try to do here is we try to work towards the creation of community building, bipartisanship, and cultural solutions to some of the most pervasive problems that we observe in society. A lot of that happens to be digitally, hence the name.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summation of it. The other thing that is interesting about the dynamic is that we both align on a lot of things, but not everything, and we both don't necessarily share the same exact view as to how one would achieve these changes, but because we agree so strongly that they need to take place, that's why we decided to do this.
That's true. And one of the things that makes our show unique is we don't actually tell the audience what our political alignments are, because it shouldn't matter as long as we're discussing progress.
True. Yeah.
So, again, you'll have to forgive us. We're both a little under the weather, but we're still here. A lot has happened last week. What with Super Tuesday, the fate of Nikki Hailey, and Biden's State of the Union speech, which was a doozy. So
it was a speech, that's for sure.
it was a speech. If you're ready, I can just launch right into Super Tuesday results.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So Super Tuesday happened. It's exactly what a lot of analysts said that would happen. For anybody out there who doesn't know what Super Tuesday is, it's essentially where 15 states can vote for primary candidates, and then there's also lesser candidates they can vote for. It really rose to prominence in 2020 when you had the likes of Michael Bloomberg, super famous billionaire, terrible person, who just started funneling money into it to try and make it like a household name. And I think by some metric he was fairly successful, because a lot more mainstream media tends to lend credence to it and draw attention to it now. In total, basically the way that it works is like each time a candidate wins a certain amount of votes in a state primary contest, it means they earn a delegate from that state. So a candidate needs to earn like X amount of delegates to be the presidential nominee, nationwide that is. Biden and Trump both dominated Super Tuesday, much to, I'm pretty sure, no one's surprise. Trump only lost the state of Vermont to Nikki Hailey, which we will discuss later. And then Biden actually lost American Samoa territory to a virtually unknown Democrat businessman named Jason Palmer. Now, you and I briefly talked about Jason Palmer yesterday in real life, but we're going to talk about him a little bit today too. Actually, I'll just tear that band-aid off right now. I did some digging. I actually really like what I was seeing from Palmer. He's an institutional Democrat, but he doesn't act like it. He's seems like a super humble guy. He's very conscious when it comes to the pros and cons of capitalism. He wants to create an ethical capitalist structure. He's got solutions for AI job outsourcing through small amounts of upscalable training, which he calls no-collar jobs. It basically gets like retail workers or other service workers into healthcare, technology, and data jobs. He also has a Quaker background. I know like a lot of Americans are Christian, or they believe it's like they have Judeo-Christian values. He has Quaker values. So a lot of his foreign policy platforms tend to be about harm reduction, because they tend to be, more passive and pacifist in nature. So he wants to focus on creating infrastructure repair, sustainability, and creating alliances instead of focusing on antagonism and destabilization, which, is kind of America's bread and butter. He seemed kind of like a breath of fresh air. Have you had a chance to look into him at all?
Just briefly, definitely not as much of a deep dive as you. He seems like he kind of offers up a much more mature and dressed up version of kind of Andrew Yang's brand from a few years ago. Modernizing, bringing modern solutions to the present day, but it seems like he actually has the structured mindset to implement these things, at least in a much more reasonable and manageable way. The problem I had with people like Yang is that it was all platitudes and idealized versions of things without realizing that we're so far from B that we need to figure out how to get there from A. Of the brief looking into Palmer that I've seen, he definitely seems to have a much better understanding of how we're going to achieve that progress. And, as much as I have my hangups about the future of the world still being sort of like front run by capitalism, this is a brand of capitalism that at least actually seems to care about equity and equality. His big thing should resonate with a lot more Americans. He seems to have a lot of policies that are structured around small business advocacy for the for job creation in the lower middle class level, not just helping protect and entrench the upper class to maintain their wealth. Modernization is something that I never really thought would have to be a problem for the United States, but pervasive throughout different levels of government, you can actually see how woefully far behind we are from other countries in the Western world, or just even in the developing world. We still run things the way that we've been running things for decades, and it's kind of shocking that the country doesn't seem to give more attention to candidates that actually want to change that about us. So it's definitely a breath of fresh air. Any politician leads me on a cynical front, but it's somebody that I didn't really know about previously and now have a desire to give more of my attention to.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you kind of brought this to my attention yesterday, and I've been thinking about it more. I would want to press him on how he would, once he establishes like an ethical capitalist outline, how he would be able to protect that out, like past his administration.
It's an easy thing to say, and I think conscious capitalism becomes a bit of a buzz phrase now for some people, because the world is becoming more and more sort of awakened to the fact that capitalism is actually creating, in my opinion and other people's opinion, a bit of a ceiling on human progress. So if you really do want to bring in a more conscious and a more ethical version of that, what are your parameters for how you define what that means, and how do you actually keep it going? How is this not just creating government oversight that then gets corrupted and bastardized and turns into something worse down the road?
You don't want Americans not retiring, and you don't want Americans working until they're on death's doorstep like Ben Shapiro? I don't understand.
I mean, I think it's only natural that humans in 2024 in multi-trillion-dollar nations should work the same level to the same degree as they did in 1823.
It's crazy that people have those positions at all.
We literally can't fathom a society in which we are not just worked to the very essence of who we are and stripped of all of our individuality and our non-labor expression as far as human beings. But those things never manifest in the way that we want them to. I mean, human beings are going to work in one way, shape, or form for any sort of lifestyle that you create for them. So the thing that kills me is how they've sold the infinite progress and the infinite improvement of life that capitalism brings, and this rampant, just insatiable version of it that we have now. And yet, despite all the money, despite all the progress, despite all the development, we have to work more. Just kind of makes me question what we've been doing this all for if it's not to really build that better life.
Yeah, corporatism is unhinged, to say the least. And I would say it fosters abusive relationships with the working class.
Absolutely. It's creating indentured servitude rather than actually giving people better lives.
I mean, this is one of those things that we agree on. I did like at least, even if it's a buzz phrase, so to speak, I did like that he had at least a vague outline in the direction he wanted to go. And he had some solutions for like getting workers at a lower class into ostensibly what seems like a more upward
Yeah,
trajectory.
I mean, he seems he has some sort of guidance.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things I would like to see come out into the open a little bit more. Granted, transparency is not really a thing that political candidates do, but it would be nice, and I think right now would be the best time, if any, to be that transparent candidate to show the framework for how we're going to do this, rather than just speaking about it in the same platitudes that we hear every 4 years.
I would agree. One thing I do, this is kind of a side note, one thing I do think is really remarkable about this dude, not to glaze him up or anything, but he beat Biden with $5,000. Now imagine what he could do with super PAC money. Because
Yeah.
last time I checked, it was like 7 in 10 American voters when they were polled, they didn't like Biden or Trump. So
I mean, that's at least a good indicator, right?
yeah, was it like the Public Affairs Center for Research Polling or some? But the majority of Americans were just, they don't want a rematch, which it looks like.
That's what you're gonna get.
That's right. That's what you get. Going back to Super Tuesday, like, because there was such dominance at the polls, it wasn't even close by any metric. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at a rematch. So
yeah, we're in most states like something in the vicinity of, Biden or Trump won with 80+% of that state's vote for the primary election.
yeah, and I don't know if you noticed, where we live, the primary, the ballot, they took off third party for primary. Like, you can only vote red or blue.
Yeah, shocking.
Yeah, I think it's pretty disgusting.
Well, you have these institutional power structures and they want to keep it that way, so.
I feel like Democrats just want to lose at this point. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think that's like a weird, like, that's just my feelings? Or do you think there's something to that?
Without spiraling too much off the trail, because I know that in personal conversations I've alluded to stuff like this before, I'll just say in the short that I absolutely agree with you. Or I would say maybe a better way to phrase it is that they are perfectly content with losing as the outcome. Maybe not so much that they are desiring that outcome.
That's fair. That's a more fair state. Because, like, how do you look at your electorate and the electorate's like, hey, we like some of the things you're doing, but we don't like this candidate. And you basically go, we hear what you're saying, but we're doing it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I said that back in 2020 as well, because they put forth the one person that seemed the least exciting in the entire Democratic Party. The least rallyable, but he was the most milquetoast and the most vanilla, so they were like, oh, absolutely, that's who we want. And if it doesn't work out, I mean, we're all keeping our jobs anyway, so what do we care? To me, the only politicians that behave quote-unquote differently than their peers are the MAGA cultists, and if that's the only variability that you get in politics, your politics are broken.
Do you think that because the politics are broken, it bred the MAGA cultists?
Yes and no. I think the MAGA cultists, Trump's existence, I think they're all things that became... everyone was complicit within this. I'm a little bit, like I said, I could go off the rails on it a little bit, but it just seems to me like there's too many things that show that the Democrats historically haven't really treated it with enough veracity. To the point where, like I said, I think they're content with that outcome, and the sort of MAGA upplay on the right-hand side of things seems to be like this overly demonstrative form of extremism. And, I mean, as we know, most of these people turn out to be purely grifters or charlatans in the first place, so it's hard to know if people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or any of these guys actually believe what they say.
All right, let me clarify. Or let me reframe my question. Do you think that because politics is broken and we have this uncertainty amongst pundits and politicians, that opened the door for like MAGA cultists to be radicalized?
Yeah, I mean, it's this clash against resistance to this sort of meaningless normalcy that's existed. I think the GOP's been running out of steam slowly for a long time, and this is a desperate grab for power. I think the world is moving against the direction of their influence and their traditional values, which I put in quotes. This is like their death throw of their last chance at breathing new life into their party.
Okay. I guess I could kind of see that. I mean, they definitely don't have any meaningful policy they're presenting for the voter base, other than
Yeah.
like, hey, we're gonna get rid of affirmative action. Outside of that, and outside of like Roe v. Wade overturning, like they don't have any. I'm not seeing anything that they've presented or put forward that's like for the betterment of Americans. They're not out there saying, here's an alternative proposal for union backing or anything like that.
Maybe this is more in line with what your original question was. We also kind of just have an entire clown show going on. So Democrats are perfectly happy letting the clown show go on because then all they have to say is, hey, at least we're not the clown show, vote for us. And they don't have to put out any substantive policy either. Granted, they're still doing much better at it than the Republicans, because the Republicans quite literally just run on blatant xenophobia, homophobia, and anti-wokeism. That's your entire political platform, and Democrats' entire political platform is don't be MAGA. So it kind of shows this closed loop of political thinking that I think, at least it's showing a tangible impact of, like you said, people overwhelmingly agreeing that a rematch of 2020 is probably the last thing that this country wants, and yet somehow it's exactly what this country gets.
If they around and they find out and Democrats lose, they're going to blame every other group except for themselves. They're going to say young people didn't vote enough, women don't care about their own rights, like black men are voting, third party or for Trump. Because I see, I think it was younger white dudes are trending conservative. They'll blame them. They'll blame everybody except for institutional Democrats making dog decisions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you have one side that is doing the emotional appeal much better than the other, and neither of them have actual substantial policy changes to bring forward, the side with the better emotional appeal wins. And right now, I think Republicans are doing a better job with the dirtiest and most disgusting form of rhetoric I've ever seen at pulling people on the heartstrings, so to speak. And I think because of things that we mentioned in the first episode of lack of media literacy, lack of political literacy, sort of divided discourse, and the inability to have, real mature conversations about politics. I think people are so chopped up and separated from being able to feel like they have a direct impact on politics around them that it's just easy to pull somebody into these larger groups.
I don't know what we're going to do about it, though.
Well, in our mind, the first start was to at least show or demonstrate and create a community based around improving the health of those conversations, improving the literacy of those things, and allowing that to sort of be the first seed planted and seeing what grows from it.
That's true. It's just frustrating for me, and sometimes, I don't want to say overwhelming, but I do get lost in the sauce at times when I think of 70% of voters vote in an emotional state. They don't vote based on policy. And I think, as to borrow a phrase in which you used in the first episode, they're committing political suicide.
I mean, absolutely. And I think that there's, like I said, it all seems like a concerted effort, a collaborative effort on the part of media and politics to keep voters primarily uninformed, emotional, irrational, and never really able to properly come to the table and discuss their needs and advocate for them.
Which brings us back to, Super Tuesday with the media promoting it and everything else, all the funding that it got. What were your takeaways from Super Tuesday?
I mean, for me, it was just mostly purely frustration. The overwhelming response is one that just kind of makes me sink my head a little bit. Like you were saying, it could get overwhelming seeing that we have this massive disconnect from what people say that they want and what people write in on a ballot. But then you find out, like in our state, for example, that they really only had the two-party choice. So it just becomes this broad-scale disappointment in my mind. But yeah, to say that I was surprised would be disingenuous. I kind of knew that we were heading towards just another a rematch of 2020, which is the last thing that I wanted, but it's also the first thing I expected.
Okay, that's fair. To kind of, I guess, pivot into expectations, did you expect the result with Nikki?
I mean, I knew that she would take one. That was kind of my feeling on it, is she has enough weight with the right people and the right interest groups that I felt that she would get at least something. Whether it would be specifically Vermont, I wouldn't be able to say accurately that I had any sort of clairvoyance or insight on that particular state's outcome, but it doesn't surprise me at all. Vermont seems like one of these areas that's very, very dressed up, very up there in terms of individual wealth and sort of higher on the class level. And so having sort of this like corporatist representative in Nikki Hailey doesn't shock me that she would take a state like Vermont.
That's a really interesting analysis. I would say corporatist is a great way to sum her up. Because you and I have talked about her at length previously, and how she plays really well with lobbyists, and she's preferred amongst the Federalist Society, and how even the Electoral College prefers her.
Yeah, I think she is the ideal candidate to protect the interests of the incredibly wealthy people that dominate influence in this country. And because of her stances and her alignment with people that are the champions of the military-industrial complex, it surprises me in no way, shape, or form that she took some holding. But it also, I think, equally demonstrates her unlikability for the average American, because she took Vermont and then got obliterated everywhere else, as far as I know.
So here's the thing. I guess let's just shift full into hit the gas on Nikki Haley. I don't know that she is like disliked by most Americans, because to me, and this is just my tertiary observation, it seemed like by certain polls she was beating the sleeves off Biden. She had like a 15-point lead on Biden in certain states. That now obviously there's a difference between a popular vote and then the electoral vote. But I don't know. I feel like she was the moderate appeal. I feel like she would peel away. She like appeals to people that are either apolitical or people that be as like a politics as usual type person. I think she appeals to like right-leaning moderates who like have a strong sense of like maybe American pride, but they want to smoke a little bit of weed, but they also support the military. But then she also, I feel like, can peel away at some of the left-leaning moderates who were like, maybe they believe that women should have access to abortion, and she had like a nuanced take on it instead of other Republicans. So she was the quote like better than nothing candidate. I feel like this, especially since all this went down under Biden's watch, and Biden could have done something about this, however you want to argue it. I feel like she could have leached voters away from him. Like if Trump wasn't on the ballot, I sometimes wonder, like, could she have actually beaten Biden?
Yeah, I struggle to think that she actually could have, and see, maybe this is just my cynicism or my blinder being put on, but I think it demonstrates more the people's desire to have some of these groups that are voting for her or putting her name down may just be so desperate for anybody other than the rematch. But when it comes to it, you know, she's getting people's input, but she's not really making any like significant victories anywhere. So maybe I think the truth might be somewhere in between my statement and yours, but I mean I think that there's definitely a desire for a more moderate candidate. The problem with a more moderate candidate is that they highlight the same problems that I think is overwhelmingly pervasive with the two-party system, which is we still have our two primary candidates not really going to move the needle in any positive direction for the American people. Nikki Haley at least comes up, and she's a nice person. She's well-spoken. She has the ability to do the emotional appeal of being like a mother. I think the cracks are slowly starting to open, but I think if she had more to bring to the table, she would have made a lot more progress, and it would be a lot more known.
Okay, I mean, That's fair. Before she dropped out though, at like being right after Super Tuesday, would you agree that she got farther than anyone thought she would?
Um,
Or do you think that this was all part of the plan, so to speak?
I mean, I think that she was pumped full of so much financial and corporate backing that she was destined to go a certain distance. But I feel like a lot of her success, maybe this is, again, maybe just being cynical, I think it was artificial. And I think she was kind of propped up to only fail to a certain degree, but I don't think she was ever going to succeed based on the merit of her own candidacy.
Sure. But I mean, just for the layman, for the average person watching, not knowing about super PAC money, not knowing about dark money, not knowing about corporate sponsorship, do you think do you think people slept on her a little more than they should have probably expected?
Yeah, and I think if I guess to your point, if people had gone into it not being so dismissive of her immediately, she could have even performed better.
What do you think the fate of Nikki Haley will be? Because after she left, given that she has such a working relationship with like the private sector, I think she's either going to go into the private sector and make millions and millions of dollars as maybe like a military liaison or like a political consultant for military contracts, or do you think maybe she might like reemerge in the future as like another? Do you think she'll do a political run again, or like what are your kind of thoughts on her trajectory, or maybe like possible outcomes for her in the future?
I think the most likely outcome, like I would say with a 90% certainty, is I agree with you that she'll slip into a very lucrative private sector position. She'll help advise different private sector ventures across the globe, and she'll make millions of dollars, and she'll be perfectly happy settling into that. But the 10% is the uncertainty of how the nation is going to respond to the 2024 election. I personally think that regardless of which of the two, assuming either of the two wins the 2024 election, that we assume will, I'm not sure what the landscape of the country is going to look like by 2028, and there may be enough entropy as a result to allow somebody like her to see an opening again. I don't know if that means that she'll be successful, but depending on how bad things get, so to speak, she could definitely make another run at it. I don't know if she'll make another run as an actual presidential candidate. She may try to attach herself as a VP, but I think the most likely outcome is that she falls back into the private sector and stays there.
Yeah, I was thinking private sector, military contracts or lobbying, and then she would come back as like a Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense or something like that in some other administration.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, like, because you usually have a pretty spot-on grasp of these things, so I always like to bounce stuff off you, kind of see if you think I'm in the general ballpark or not.
Yeah, I could see her definitely making a Secretary of Defense play. Again, I think a lot of it kind of hinges on what the next 4 to 8 years looks like, but I think she's going to go away for a while, and then depending on how bad things get or how chaotic things get, she may try to pop back up again.
Well, if The Simpsons are any metric of clairvoyance and future telling, Trump will win and he'll bankrupt the country, and then we'll get a female president. That's a joke, by the way, but The Simpsons did do an episode on that.
Well, I mean, historically, aren't The Simpsons the clairvoyance of American politics?
Yeah, man, who needs a religion and whatever when you have The Simpsons there to tell you what's going to happen? I actually, you know what? Now I'm going to do, after this, I'm going to look and see if The Simpsons ever did anything on the State of the Union.
Oh, good lord.
Speaking of, this brings us to kind of the meat and potatoes of this conversation. The State of the Union. As you said, it was a speech. There was Republicans triggered as you had Democrats doing apologia copium at the yin yang. Like, I don't think a lot of people had how to put it, honest analysis of it either way. Like, my favorite take was the Republicans that were like, he's high, he's clearly on drugs, because He was too sassy. He was a sassy bitch that whole time. Biden never talks back. That was like my favorite take.
It's not like Trump is some youthful guy that has all this vibrant natural energy. The dude's probably pumped full of all kinds of amphetamines every time he talks.
Yeah, there was a, I can't remember what it was, but there was like a court hearing recently about Trump, and they did like this montage of gaffes he makes and like slurred speech, and basically the predominant conversation being had is Trump either like, does he have dementia, or is he like at risk of dementia? Does he have these cognitive impairments? Which has been the conversation forever about Biden. Like, this was a conversation when Obama was still president, whether Biden was competent. So it's just interesting to see the shoe on the other foot. They're both old. They're both like 80 years old. Like, stop.
One thing that a lot of people may not be ready to realize is that there's probably a long history of drug abuse in the White House. Whether it be staffers, speechwriters, I'm sure you could find it at every level. I thought it was kind of funny to assume otherwise. Like, I just assumed that they're all coked up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If you put a bunch of paralegals and committee members in a room, you lock them in there for 2 days, and you say, make a resolution to this bill or write this into law, and you can't leave until it's done, they're doing some sort of upper. I'm sorry.
No, just lots of coffee. Lots of coffee and patriotism. Patriotism is the energy.
Dude, there it is. That's the shirt. Coffee and patriotism.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
But yeah, no, the State of the Union was, in a lot of ways, it was exactly what I expected. A lot of, bolstering this idea that Biden has swooped in and saved the country, even though the average American feels that the exact opposite has been the case. Maybe not the opposite in that he's destroyed it, but that it is in no way, shape, or form saved by any measure. Throwing out statistics that would obviously be maybe not entirely false, but incredibly misleading and not accurately representing the real numbers of what he's done, the real stats of what he's achieved. But, and the only thing that I think really happened that I didn't expect was what Republicans didn't expect, which is the snapback sort of sassiness of the president, which is something that a lot of Democrats and a lot of liberals have been super excited about. And I'm personally one of those people that thinks, like, if you're so pedantic as to take away from the State of the Union that you're proud that your president was, quote, sassy with his political rivals, then we're in a lot of fucking trouble than we should be.
Very true. But it was funny.
It was hilarious. I mean, again, I think, like I said and alluded to earlier, most of our American politics now are purely performative, so in terms of performative politics and memeable moments, which seems to be more important these days, it was great.
Yeah, and for the audience, when I say it's funny, I don't mean like necessarily funny haha, which some of it was, but I mean funny like we're looking like it's dark comedy, like nihilism. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's bleak as
Yeah. No, it's if you didn't walk away from the State of the Union with this sense of like a looming dread in the background, even though some of it was entertaining, well, then you're either a hardcore go to bat for Republicans or hardcore go to bat for Democrats. So
I did take some notes during the State of the Union. I thought maybe we could kind of go over them here, and I thought maybe you could kind of give me your thoughts on some of the things that I wrote down. I could give you my thoughts, obviously, and then you tell me what you think is like a hit or a miss or an in-between. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we can start with, actually we'll do it this. I'll frame it. I'll tell the audience about basically the long and short of it, right? Which is, I think this is probably the strongest speech that Biden's given in the entire time he was president. Okay, that's not necessarily a good thing, but it is a thing. That's good for him, but not good for us. I liked the jokes and clapbacks. Again, I think it's kind of more of like from a laugh so you don't cry situation. It was nice to see him engage with some of the more asinine characters, which, like you said, it's a performance, right? So there's characters like Marjorie Taylor Greene, decked out in MAGA gear with the Laken Riley buttons, screaming "Say her name," right? Have you heard about the Laken Riley story? I assume.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. So for anyone out there who isn't familiar, Laken Riley was like a 20-something, I think she was 22, medical student. She was murdered by an illegal immigrant or an undocumented immigrant. I'm not sure what the proper vernacular on that is. So naturally, Republicans are up in arms over it, and they want to use this poor girl's death as a political pawn, which I think is despicable. There's lots of political pawns that happened actually in this speech. Biden used 3 of them, which I also don't like, but I'll get into that later. He had, I guess, he kind of addressed like the same old stuff. It was protect democracy from, a looming dictatorship, soft on immigration stances with like pathway to citizenship. He had like the whole quote record-setting job growth, which you and I kind of touched on yesterday. I need to do some follow-up fact checking on the CPI and like how that works and if that's true. He kind of reviewed his infrastructure bill, and then of course we obviously had the support for Israel and Ukraine, yada yada yada. There was some slight changes to rhetoric when it came to like Roe v. Wade and the IFV, I think it is, in vitro fertilization, right? I'd argue that they intentionally have waited till a re-election cycle to address it, because I think that that's going to be what they really lean on to try and get votes for women or get younger voters like active. What do you think?
If you go up there and preach to me the importance of, I believe in this so strongly that, as Biden said multiple times in reference to various things, I'm putting a stop to it, or I'm not letting this happen, or I'm not doing this. But he really should end every sentence with, as long as you keep me in power for the next 4 years. I'm not going to do it now, of course, even though I still have plenty of time. I'm going to do it when you give me the next 4 years, because that's how the game is played. So, all that aside, yes, it seems like they've been waiting for this moment to bring up this long laundry list of things that we're going to do in the future, so long as you protect me in my position. And I just, it's a tactic. It's all a part of how it's played. But yeah, I think that they've had a couple things in the holster that they've been waiting to bring out. IVF is definitely one of the big ones.
Yeah, it's gross. It's a gross way to do things. You would think that it would make more sense to obviously give women their rights back and then be like, if you don't vote for me, they will repeal these again. But because I care about you, I want to make sure this is done now, just in case I'm not reelected. But instead, it seems to be the opposite, like you were saying. It seems to be like, if you do this for me, then I'll do this for you. But as we've seen, like when Biden ran originally, I think it was only like half of his election promises were kept anyway. So I don't even know how much is going to be kept this time.
As we talked about in the first episode, we have a Congress right now that is woefully uninterested in making a lot of, considerable progress when it comes to bipartisan decisions. So, in my mind, if you wanted to secure my vote, you would codify things like Roe v. Wade now. You would go full court press now and show me that you actually mean what you say. You walk the walk rather than talking the talk, because that's what we're all tired of, is the talking the talk and never walking the walk. Be different. Do something different. I think that this was an opportunity to not only come out and say, I'm going to do X, I'm going to do Y, and I'm going to do Z, but it all depends on you. It's now your responsibility, not really my responsibility as president of the United fucking States. I've actually already done these things, so surprise everybody, tonight, here's a bunch of shit that I did, and, take that with whatever grain of salt you want, and you'll go home knowing that I actually fought for you, instead of this promissory note that I might fight for you over the next 4.5 years.
How many times do they tell you in a workplace quid pro quo is, a form of like a power dynamic that's abusive, and yet all of our politicians do it constantly?
Yeah, I mean it's not even it's not even something that they just do constantly. It's something that's the primary means of engagement for a politician.
You watched all of the State of the Union, right?
I sure did.
How did you feel when outside of like the Lake and Riley, because she was like the main, I think, Republican political pawn. How did you feel when Biden used the gal that was denied in vitro, the survivor of the civil rights Selma Bloody Sunday incident, the Selma Bridge, and then how did you feel when you saw the was it the gal whose sister was killed in a school shooting?
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought all of that was despicable to use these as like a social cudgel to either beat people into submission or pluck at heartstrings. It feels just inherently manipulative.
Yeah, I mean that's entirely what it's designed to do. Every time you're pointing to somebody that is, especially like stories from decades ago, so they can bring up some sort of bill that must be passed now based on the fact that this person is a survivor of some horrific, American legacy. It's to me, it's just like I said, classic Democrat, classic politician. It's dirty, it's manipulative, it's unsubstantive, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's meant for you to feel like if you, by extension, if you don't have like avidly, sorry, my nose and my sinuses are all messed up.
I'm right there with you.
When you're forced to stare into the eyes of somebody whose family member died or friend died of gun violence, and you're not like going immediately into the booth tomorrow or immediately contacting your members of Congress shouting that this bill needs to be passed, then it's like they're making you feel that by extension you are okay with gun violence and you're okay with that person dying, or even that you're in direct support of that person dying. It's subtle, but not really. And I'm really, really sick of it. I don't necessarily want these people's stories to not be told, but for them to be put into a literal spotlight in the middle of a town hall just so Kamala Harris can do 6,000 up downs and burn her quadriceps out. I think to me just screams dystopian nightmare.
Yeah, I thought the whole thing was in really poor taste for all of them, Republicans and Democrats. I think they should all be ashamed of themselves, and I would hope that. And now I understand this is like part of like why I said it's a power dynamic. The American citizens are going there because they think that their voices will be heard, but in reality, they're just being served up. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I would argue. I could actually think you could argue something a little bit more sinister. I think these people, some of these people are smart enough to understand that they're being used, but because they care so much about what happened to them and what their story is, they feel that this is the only meaningful way. Yeah, I mean, it's the only meaningful way that they can maybe influence change, but yeah, it's so very clear to me that, I mean, just piles and piles of dead humans being used as political ammunition to fire at its opposition.
For sure, for sure. So I've like the way that I did this, we started with the bad. So I'm gonna go down the list of like the things I didn't like, and then we'll end it on positive notes, like we did the first episode. I think that that's like a good layout. I don't want to leave people feeling completely depressed and lost, you know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Another thing that I didn't like about the conversation was the microchip manufacturing portion. I think that like outwardly it seems cool that we're developing these microchips that America needs, but I actually think Biden's setting up to abandon Taiwan. I know I've kind of been expecting that for a long time. Taiwan's been the chief manufacturer of these chips for like guidance systems, phones, electronics, whatever, and they're like very specific chipsets. They're really advanced and they can be programmed for like intercontinental ballistics. China's been trying to get those intellectual properties for like well over a decade, and America hasn't had access to them here, but Biden has multiple private industries funding the creation of that. I think it was, I have it written down here, it was like $260 billion of private investing money going into that. So I think that's actually, like, even though it sounds good, I think it's actually a huge red flag. I don't know if they expect China to invade and they're just going to pull Ukraine where they like give them weapons and make it as difficult for China as possible. I don't know if they're expecting something else. Maybe none of that will happen, hopefully, but I just don't like the way it looks. I don't like the precedent it sets, if you will. And because the majority of those jobs, when he mentioned that it was going to be going to people where they're making, over $100,000 a year with no degree, the majority of those jobs are actually not going to American-born citizens. They're going to either immigrants that have come here on work visas, or they're going to people that are, I guess, are already in those industries, already making that money.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I will say to Taiwan is maybe it's not so far as that he's planning on an abandonment strategy, because last year, of the only 27 bills that were passed, there was the United States Taiwan First Agreement Implementation Act for 21st Century Trade, but I think he's creating an out. So even if the plan isn't to explicitly manufacture that exit strategy, I think he's giving himself a way to back out of it if things get heated. I know for me, I feel very strongly that there's going to be some sort of dust up this year or within the next year or two between China and Taiwan. I think China's economic situation is going to lead to a bit of a desperation from them and their leadership, and I think Taiwan's going to be at the victim of that. But otherwise, I think Biden's administration is trying to show allyship to Taiwan, but they're also trying to say, hey, we're not going to go down swinging with you, and because we're worried about the potential of Chinese retribution, so to speak, we're preparing an exit strategy for ourselves. But yeah, as far as where the jobs are being created and how they're being created, it's classic misleading information to make him seem like he's a champion of American labor, as he always tries to be and always espouses, whether it be on social media or during his speeches. But it's a bit disingenuous. It's not that these people aren't important to employ or that they're not deserving of these jobs. It's that he's giving the jobs to people who kind of already have an in these industries. He's not generating new prosperity for people, so to speak. Not nearly to the levels that he's trying to make you think he is. So it's setting him up to look really, really good, when in reality, the story is somewhere maybe halfway in between the cynical view and his overwhelmingly optimistic view of things.
Either way, it was like a red flag that went off in my mind. It seemed like either a benign neglect policy was about to be enacted, or like you said, an exit right stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're giving themselves I think they're giving themselves the fork in the road, and they're kind of feeling out Chinese response. And depending on how China responds with Taiwan, I think they're giving themselves another avenue to go down. But the fact that they've created that avenue now, I agree with you, is inherently alarming.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not just crazy paranoid. Which kind of you'd mentioned he's like the workers' president, right? One of the things he mentioned was, to keep it on the same kind of level of red flag, taxing the rich. Again, another thing that sounds good at first, but the way that he talked about it, I think it would inherently create more problems than solutions. Like, he was talking about increasing corporate tax rate to a number, like I think he said like up to 25% minimum tax to raise, I think he said $500 billion over 10 years. And that's on like billionaires and corporations. Neither one is going to go for that. I think what would actually happen is you would have billionaires and CEOs and all these hedge funds get together, and they would take that 25% of their earnings that they were going to get cut for taxes, And I think they would actually create like a lobbying group or super PACs, and they would just do whatever they can to upend that legislation or create or amend for like loopholes so they can get around that. I also feel like if you have corporations that are saying, hey, we're getting taxed like 25% of our bottom line or whatever, we're just going to outsource our manufacturing to some other country, which kind of flies in the face of Biden saying he wants to make America the bastion of manufacturing again. So for me, it was kind of concerning. I'm not saying these things are bad, because obviously you and I both agree corporations are absolutely ridiculous. They're unhinged. There's no one holding them accountable. Something has to change. I agree 1,000,000%. But I feel like to just overtly be like, we're taxing the shit out of you, it's not going to go well for the American worker.
I mean, for me, it seems like over Biden's presidency, taxing the rich has become sort of the scapegoat boogeyman for all of our problems. The reasons Democrats can't give you better social welfare and social programs is because billionaires don't pay their taxes. It's horseshit. And I'm tired of it being used as political leverage because it's so obviously disingenuous. Do you really think $500 billion over the next decade is going to resolve the social issues that we're lacking? It's going to fix medical care infrastructure. It's going to heal education. We spend over $1 trillion on welfare every year. And that's dating back through like 2019, 2020. And now we're talking about $500 billion, less than half of that number over a decade is going to heal the problems. I'm not saying I wouldn't want the money. I care more about equal taxation for the sake of establishing to the average American that everyone pays their fair share. But even that emotional platitude just speaks volumes, because that's what he was saying. He kept saying, pay their fair share, pay their fair share. He wasn't really demonstrating what tangible benefit that would have back into the American ecosystem. He just kept espousing that it was about fairness. And as you said, there's no way this sticks. I think that they put billionaires on blast and put, capitalists, ironically, on blast to, incite that already deep-seated disdain for billionaires that a lot of left-leaning voters have. But again, it's a boogeyman strategy. It's, this is why we can't have nice things, because people like Elon Musk, companies like Apple and Amazon aren't paying their fair share. No, it's because your government doesn't want you to have it. Not because billionaires should not be the ones responsible for funding your universal healthcare or whatever idealized healthcare, infrastructure, education, etc., whatever word you want to use. They're not the ones responsible for it. I still think that they're greedy, and I think that they've destroyed a lot of what could be good about society and continue to advocate against progress for the average person. But I think that that's a separate observation from them being the sole responsibility for fixing the failures of government.
Do you think that's because the reason he's using this rhetoric, do you think that's because he's just trying to galvanize younger people with those buzz phrases that we see so frequently on social media? Or do you think that there's some other reason for him repeatedly just hammering, pay their fair share, tax the rich, yada, 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 whatever social platitude?
100% it's to galvanize young voters. Because young voters, as far as I could tell, don't really love Joe Biden at all. But the one thing that he knows young people do like is talking about eating the rich, taxing the rich. Capitalism is the bane of all existence. Corporations are the bane of all existence, and they're the reason we don't have nice things. They're literally just farming data off of our social media of millennials and Gen Zers and putting it directly into the State of the Union. But he doesn't actually care about these things, and he knows that at a political level, it's never going to actually come to fruition. And when it doesn't, then he can say, the Republicans love corporations. How evil are they? Please keep voting for me and my party, because we're finally eventually somewhere down the road, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we'll eventually get those guys.
I know that there has to be like a phrase or a word that underlines that, where you intentionally offer a gesture, knowing it won't be fulfilled, and then you're able to do like this sleight of hand, blame it on the other group. The other group already knew that you had no intention of fulfilling that, and then it creates that infinity loop of the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean,
Almost
that's
yeah, go ahead.
that's been the primary form of policy. Policy isn't even about passing bills anymore. It's about telling people what bills you'll pass, and then blaming the other side for when it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm sure in political science there is a phrase or a word that gives, I guess, that underlines that specific action. I don't know. I'm just curious. If anyone that's listening knows what it is, put it in the comments.
And if it's not a term, it needs to be one.
True.
So,
big
yeah,
true.
look, maybe the community can, if it doesn't exist already in nomenclature, maybe we as a community can invent a term for it, and then we can permeate that through the rest of discourse.
Super based. Okay, so I think we agree on that. One of the things that I think was also potentially problematic, this is what it seems like. It seems like lots of leading with good, or seemingly good, but there's some hidden shit on the back end, like police funding. Okay, so I'm gonna lose a lot of people, I think, with this one, but he claims that he wants to give communities the tools to deal with carjacking, retail crime, and gun crime. Those are his words. But the ways that he wants to do that is by investing in the police. Now, I want to be perfectly clear. There is a huge distinction, at least in my mind, between investing in police, which would be like specific training, de-escalation of force, the ability to communicate properly, therapy for trauma, yada, 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 and massively funding police unions, projects like you mentioned the other day, the police city, and then the continuation of militarizing city PD units. Those are two totally different things. And it seems as if I had to, take a wild stab in the dark, his answer, his solution seems to be massively funding police unions and continuing to produce projects like Police City, and obviously militarization of local PD. So I feel like that is going to be a huge problem moving forward. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a misplay on his part. Ever since Trump was put in office, and you've had this combativeness between left and right, etc., is that a lot of police officers have revealed themselves, not that they haven't been before, but they're much more on the right side of the political spectrum now. And I think he's lost a lot of people that are more moderates because of this whole asinine view that retail crime and, things like bums on your street corners are the most pervasive issues for the average American citizen. And let's not pretend that Democrats don't love them some cops. I mean, historically speaking, I think that they are just as cop obsessed as anyone else. And I think that this was him sort of missing an opportunity to continue down a more positive rhetoric that a lot of his voter base would align with. But I really think it was him trying to pull some people back over to his side of things. It might work, because it was a really great emotional appeal with a little touch of fear-mongering dripped in there. People are afraid of all the crime that's happening around them, so let's just put cops on every corner again, because historically that's never had any negative ramifications. So yeah, I think this is a potentially failed attempt for him to garner more sympathy from those people.
I don't get it. If you love cops so much, why not give the police the things they need? And I don't mean AR-15s and hollow point bullets. I mean, why don't they actually have access to mental health services, so they don't kill themselves or their wives? Because last time I checked, the number that was the top 3 killer of cops was suicide, COVID, and heart attacks. But the domestic violence was through the roof for police. Most police officers get divorced, and there was a huge portion of those divorces that had at one point in time the spouse had dealt with domestic violence, men and women.
Yeah, I mean, we're at the point now where an acorn falling on the roof of a car means you pump 40 bullets into a potential handcuffed man in the back of your squad car.
God forbid. there have been
Yeah.
a child around, you know, riding their bike or some.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about a profession that, and you know, I'm one of those people that's not going to pretend that they have some sort of easy job. I'm not necessarily for complete depolicing of everything, but the presence that they've had historically, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that the profession itself breeds, like you said, domestic violence issues. The people that do the jobs are inherently unhealthy, undertrained, and under-resourced in terms of help for the individual themselves. And now we have a bunch of cops that are just trigger pullers, and you can't have a healthy society in which the solution to all of your problems is put more people with guns with trigger fingers that are, you know, hair triggers in every you know, Staples, Apple Store, Best Buy around the country, just because people are tired of shoplifters.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that you don't agree with me on this. I'm not saying that police, especially depending on where they work, isn't a risky job. There are inherent risks, especially in like any sort of defensive job or like enforcement of certain thing job. But their job is not as dangerous as people want to make it out to be. I'm not advocating, nor would I ever advocate for the abolishment of police. I'm not saying police don't make sacrifices. I'm not saying their job isn't hard. And I'm not saying that they aren't at risk, right? Like, obviously, officers die doing what they do. But if we're talking about like an oil rigger and we're talking about a police officer, those are not the same levels of risk. So I get frustrated when I hear Democrats and Republicans bootlick so much and then go, we're going to give you just massive funding. Even though, like, if you, again, a lot of the problems we're having with police, I think, could be solved if they weren't in perpetual states of fight and flight. But that's like, I think, trauma response. So
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
their job becomes inherently more dangerous because they're trapped in this fight or flight. So when they engage someone, they're not engaging them. I mean, some cops are respectful, some cops are chill, right? But at any time, they have to be able to escalate that violence to a maximum degree because a lot of them feel as if they're on a deployment. Like they act like they're soldiers and they have to make it home to their families, which is a narrative fed to them by like the academy they go to, which I don't agree with. And there's multiple people who have extensive military backgrounds. One of the guys who was a former officer, former ranger, who was in our state as a cop, got banned as an officer because he was making videos about like, oh, stop treating civilians like you're dealing with insurgents.
I've heard the story, but I have only like a surface level understanding of it, so I'm not as educated on it.
Gotcha. So I think it was like 2020. You know, obviously there was that like big contentious moment between like protesters and police. This guy made a video and it was like more sympathetic to protesters. He's like, look, you can't do some of these things, have some of these policies, have qualified immunity, and people not be pissed. So stop treating people as if they're terrorists. I know that was like a lot and it's like a tangential rant, but like I know there's a lot of like politics that goes into police and like why they're policing and how they police and their state of mind and all of that other shit. But it's just like really frustrating if you understand that, or if you are an officer, or if you're a politician that's afraid of black people and you want police, why wouldn't you give the officers quality of life? Because I'm sorry, if you're terrified every time you pull over like a minivan that there's a fucking Mac 10 in there and you're gonna die, that's not a healthy mind. Like, the culture around policing is if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's, you know, some of it is the nature of the type of people who are drawn to that profession, but I think another big problem, like you alluded to, is that politicians and, you know, local government especially, do not see police as people. They see them as weapons against people that they don't want coming after them. Police are the extension, they are the billy club in the hand of the wealthy. The upper class uses police against lower class people and to scare middle class people. And I think that that's always been true to a certain degree, which is why I try, unless they walk into it, which they often do and completely deserve it, I don't try to vilify all people who work as police officers, because there's also a lot of police officers that are starting to be better about saying these things, Not nearly as many as I would like, and not nearly as many as we deserve to hear. But real cops, which is an important job, have to be the biggest champions for these reforms. And when they hear things like this from the State of the Union, I honestly would love to hear from some different police officers that come out and say, right, but why don't you actually give us the funding in these ways rather than just strictly arming us to the gills? Because as we've proven over time, that doesn't heal the problems that our society faces.
1,000,000%. I would argue that actually, like kind of like you said, the cops being weaponized against the civilian population. Also, it doesn't justify the brutality, but it does, in a roundabout way, make the cops also victims in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
I know that's a hot take. A lot of people in my social circles would not like that take, but I think it's true.
Yeah, I mean, I just happen to, obviously, you can't let anecdotal evidence sway you too much. I happen to know a lot of people that are either currently or were formerly in law enforcement for their careers. And every one of them that I talk to has said the same things that we say about the dangers of policing, the inherent corruption that poisons the workforce when it comes to cops, the disassociation between the humanity of a police officer and the politician that employs them. So, I think that there's actually a really, really good opportunity for different interest groups to come to the table and find amicable solutions, but I'm not sure that those solutions are going to be handed down by political representatives, because I think politicians have a very clearly defined use for police officers, and it's not to, quote, keep communities safe most of the time.
I agree, and I also think that that's partly due to police unions. I think a lot of police unions are super corrupt, and I think that they work in tandem with the politicians to keep police where they're at, and by proxy keep the civilian population where they're at.
Yeah, you're noticing a through point here of people collaborating to create closed loops for the American people.
Yep.
Seems to be pretty prevalent in everything that we're discussing.
Yeah, so now we just need the American people to collaborate, to work together to create something antithetical to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, sorry, I know that was a rant, but I think that was an important conversation, like a sub-conversation to have when addressing like policing and funding and stuff like that.
Definitely. All right, so outside of that, you said you had a few more notes.
Yeah, the VP apparently is heading up a gun violence prevention initiative. I don't know what the that means. Biden said he does plan to he wants a ban on all automatic assault weapons and high capacity mags, and he wants to, I guess, make an amendment or put a green light on you must pass universal background checks. Universal background checks, I don't have a problem with. I think that they can kind of catch things that fall through. I don't have an issue with that. I don't even necessarily have an issue with a ban on automatic assault rifles and high capacity magazines. Like, I think I would need some nuance around that topic, but I think, because I'm like a staunch 2A person for certain reasons, very specific reasons. But even if that was the case, like you can only own a semi-automatic rifle, I can live with that. But the VP heading up a gun violence prevention initiative, it's too vague, and I don't know what that means. It would have been nice if he had clarified that, what that entails, how much money we're spending on it, what the goal of that is. Is it just gun education? Is it to get more people? Like, are there requirements to where when you buy a gun you have to take these safety classes? Is it like health checks? Like, what does it mean? A lot of people care a lot about their Second Amendment, and it's a super contentious topic in America right now. So you can't just say something as broad sweeping as that and then immediately move on. That was kind of it made my eye twitch a little.
Yeah, unless that's exactly your intention, which is to espouse something that's incredibly vague, not provide any tangible information, and hopefully garner some sympathy from voter bases. Again, it's complete emotional manipulation. It's teetering on fear-mongering. If you don't like the fact that I'm having my VP head up gun violence prevention, then you're okay with the status quo of mass shootings day after day after day, etc., etc., etc. I know that these things aren't being explicitly stated, but these are subtle manipulations of your emotional state and your mental state, and they're meant to make you vote a certain way if you espouse this, and then the other party espouses the exact opposite desire. But the thing is, some good news. I know that somebody in the Republican Party, in the GOP, in the MAGA cult, or whatever, is going to have more information about this very soon, because I'm sure that they heard that, said the same things that we said, but then went overboard with it emotionally and knew that they had to find any and all information pertaining to it so they could use it as political ammunition for their own voter base, to scare their own voter base from their guns being taken away from them, or their rights, or whatever it is they say nowadays.
All this tells me is that we should invest in guns. If they're going to do a fear mongering about like we're banning these things, I'm investing in ammunition and firearms, and you should too. Let's make a bunch of money.
Probably, yeah. Whatever Pelosi's investing in right now. Let's follow her.
Yeah. Let's go. Yeah, but wouldn't that be funny though if like Biden actually low-key had investments in firearm manufacturers and he just said that to drive up profits?
I mean, I kind of think that that's a normality for most members of Congress nowadays anyway. I mean,
yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, it's like the whole reason that one of the main reasons we're trying to ban them from even trading is because it allows them to drive up their own net worth.
Yeah, you're right. So
yeah.
It was just like I said, it was just I guess my knee jerk. Like, wait, what? And then I guess lastly, this one I feel like doesn't apply to maybe the average listener, but it is like I said in the first episode, stuff dealing with the black community is like near and dear to my heart. So he mentioned funding HBCUs. The problem is he didn't elaborate on how much they're receiving, how they're going to receive it, because historically a lot of times in order to receive funding, HBCUs, for anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's a historically black college, they take funding in exchange for cutting certain programs. One of the programs that they ended up having to cut nationwide was Black history, teaching Black history. So like, how the are we going to have an HBCU and other places in the country don't teach Black history because it's being banned, but yet the black college is not allowed to teach Black history if it wants to stay open? Like, I don't know. I didn't like that very much. And he had nothing to say about bringing back affirmative action. So I don't know if that's like something they're going to keep in their back pocket. I don't know if they basically doing the full on the benign neglect and they're just like, it, black people had their chance. Like, now it's racist against everyone else, which it's not. So we're just going to like let it die with the Supreme Court. It seems it's like the same every day. Like I said, Democrats and Republicans don't care about black people. They use them as shields. With Republicans, it's shields to do racism and prevent progress. And with Democrats, it seems like it's just to promote that whole everyone benefits narrative. But what that actually means is everyone but black people usually. So again, it's just I see this escalation backwards socially. We're backsliding entirely. So that was frustrating for me. But that's like a me personally, and I'm sure there's black Americans that feel that way. But I'm just frustrated.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that, and I actually don't agree, or I guess you didn't say that they would. I don't think that they're going to keep affirmative action in their back pocket at all. I think you're going to find that that's the one thing that they don't use as ammunition against their political rivals. I think that they'll harp on all of the sort of the more like feminism-driven movements. They'll focus on Roe v. Wade, IVF, things like that. But I think you'll find that affirmative action doesn't get mentioned hardly at all in this upcoming election year, which is pretty sad. I think that I can definitely foresee the backsliding of black issues being brought up. I mean, I don't mean to laugh in the sense that I think it's humorous. I just think it's, a classic Democratic move where it's like, well, that's the last thing that we really want to talk about. I mean, we put a spotlight on a black woman on TV. What else do you need from us? It kind of feels like it's one of those things. It's like, we showed you our visual representation. We're not even going to speak to what we're actually going to do to help these people in this community any further. Let's just move on with the real issues.
But oh my gosh, it's so disrespectful. They literally showed a woman and she was siding with Biden, right? They used black history about civil rights while not addressing civil rights that are being undone to black people in America. The irony is just insane.
Right.
But they used it as like a narrative, or I guess a MacGuffin to push the voter narrative, voter suppression. Okay, cool. Like, let's fix voter suppression. Let's make sure these communities have access to voting. I'm all for all of that because I believe in voting. I think it's important. However, there are these other things that are also important, because if you have we already know that old black people vote year over year as some of the most consistent voters, and they vote for the Democratic Party. So I understand the Democratic Party cares about getting their vote. I get that. What I don't get is how you can say that you are the party of progress, and you care about workers, and you care about the history of this country, and even Biden says we haven't always lived up to the American ideal, but we can, and then you don't.
I mean, I've used the phrase multiple times on this show. Tale as old as time, nothing changes. We'll show them on screen, but we won't actually talk about anything that's directly to their benefit, to the black community's benefit. Because the voter protection, that's for everybody. We'll use the awful, destructive history of the black community in America to pull at the heartstrings, but it's really to pass policy that's for all Americans, not for anybody in the black community. And then we're not even going to talk about policy driven by the needs of the black community because, well, I mean, isn't it time we all just moved on? Isn't it all about being united?
Yep. But yeah, that was the long and short of my, I guess, dislikes. I guess on the brighter side, there were some things that I thought were pretty decent. I know a lot of people have wild takes. I'm sorry, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or are you okay if we shift?
I just wanted to say that even though I don't know that this conversation would ever find her, I had no way intend for my disdain at the Democratic Party to reflect anything on Betty Mae Fikes, who's the woman that we're referencing as far as the person that was put up there. She's great. Her story is something that I think is really important to highlight. I just don't appreciate the fact that it was used in such a manipulative, cheap way. I think she deserves much more respect than she was given in that moment.
Based. Super based. I appreciate that. But you're okay if we shift them to like a more positive note?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at this point, both us and our audience are probably ready for that.
Yeah. So, Palestine and Israel. Wild takes.
Whoa! I thought you said positive note.
So, yeah, wild takes. I guess this will be the bridge. This will be the neutral thing, and then I'll get into the more like objectively positive stuff.
The peer, so to speak.
Yeah. So, regardless of what you personally believe, regardless of what I personally believe, regardless of what the audience personally believes, there are some objective truths to things occurring in that conflict, right? Both on Israel's side and things they're doing, and both on the Gazan side and things they're doing. So Biden said that Israel has been reckless and they need to stop disproportionately bombing the Gaza Strip, and they need to basically hold themselves responsible for the killing of innocents, or I guess civilian targets, shall we say. That's a big deal because when this first kicked off, Biden's stance was we're unconditional support for Israel. Basically, if you don't like it, lump it. We're doing it no matter what. Who cares? F y'all. Israel, go. You got the green light. Like, we got you. Now, because of the primaries, right? Funny enough, Super Tuesday, him getting the primary votes. It's like, we're voting Democrat, but we're undecided, to send a message, a protest vote. This is why voting third party or protest votes actually have power. It got Biden to acknowledge that people were how do I put this? His position was untenable for the electorate that he was appealing to. A lot of people wanted him, even if he was going to give support to Israel, a lot of people wanted him to do something about what they perceived to be a humanitarian crisis. He talked about leading a military operation in which a pier would be built, a port of entry so that the Gazans could receive aid, and it would be unhampered by either Israeli attacks and or Houthis showing up to sink supplies or steal supplies, because I don't give a f*** what anyone says. the Houthis are not good, and they're not there to benefit Gazans. They're not helping anyone. They're fucking child slaving terrorists. So it is what it is. It is interesting to see Biden soften his stance somewhat. Obviously, he's a Zionist. He's going to be pro-Israel, pro the state of Israel. Like, this isn't my opinion. This is what he has said previously. So what are your thoughts as an onlooker, and having you and I have both followed the conflict more than probably either of us alike? What are your thoughts seeing him kind of soften his stance? Or do you think that this is more bait and switch, essentially?
I mean, I think, as you know now, one word that would be good to describe me, and I've used it before earlier on in the episode. I'm always a bit of a cynic. Maybe I'm a little bit jaded. I'm trying to be less so. But my cynical nature tells me that this is a sort of a rhetorical bait and switch. But I think it does highlight a point that you just made, which is that it actually does give insight to people who are paying attention that you can use your votes as political ammunition. I've used the phrase political ammunition multiple times, and I think this might be one of the few instances in which we've proven that the voter base actually has their own ammunition. This was always supposed to be the case and always has been the case, but we haven't realized it. This is like a small little fracture in the visage that surrounds that political influence. If more people specifically spoke to these kinds of issues and took votes away from Joe Biden when it came to, harping on the specific issues that they have with his policies, and I'm only using him as the direct example, but it could be anybody, then it would actually be the only political leverage that you have to see the changes that you wish to be shown in the world. So I think that we should be full gas down on independent voting, because it's the only way for us to properly advocate in a meaningful way that resonates that these are the things that we're strictly not okay with. The line has been drawn in the sand, and this is what we're going to do about it. And you're going to lose your position, which is frankly the only thing that you care about. You're going to lose that political influence on the basis that you do not represent the needs of the people. And if you continue to, deflect and ignore those needs, this is what's going to happen to you, and something actually is going to happen. As far as whether or not he truly stands by or believes what he says, I don't know that I can fully sign on that. Like you said, he is a Zionist. He's openly admitted this. I think that his conversations about Israel-Palestine right now have equally as much to do with the fact that he despises Netanyahu more than he actually cares about what's going on specifically. That doesn't mean that we can't use that to our advantage. I think, again, it's all about finding pressure points. It's about finding fulcrums. And this is one of the few things that's happening in the world that, we blasted the attempt at a solution in my opinion, all the wrong directions. Having these meaningless local gatherings where we voted for ceasefires that meant absolutely nothing to the broader conflict. It was purely performative. This is the meaningful way. The meaningful way is to take votes away from these political candidates for not representing the things that you want. And the reason that more people aren't doing it is because they're terrified that Trump is going to be elected if they take votes away from Biden. Well, I'm sorry, but at some point, you have to take a stand. If you truly have the conviction that you claim that you do, this is the only way to demonstrate that. This is the form of protest, so to speak. Not voting is not an accurate form of protest. It solves nothing. Voting away from these candidates is the only way that you can actually make change occur when it comes to these broader scale geopolitical issues, especially. And while I think that it's good that he's finally coming out and saying the things that we've been wanting him to say for a long time, or many of us have been wanting him to say for a long time, there's still a lot of ground that needs to be gained. But I think it's interesting that we now have seen him so staunchly in position one way. It didn't really take that much time, and the cracks are already forming. So now I think it needs to be full pressure in that direction.
100%, I agree. To entertain a conspiracy, maybe I'm being conspiratorial, but hypothetically, Well, factually, he said that there would be no U.S. boots on the ground, right? Going back to the port issue.
Yeah.
Um, do you think, how do I put this? If they're sending aid to a port and there's no one there to protect it, do you think that it's just going to get, the supplies will just be ascertained by Hamas anyway, which would then lend credence to all the more, in the eyes of the media, to Israel?
I definitely wouldn't put it out of any sort of possibility. Again, I think it's a very performative effort to try and demonstrate that they are providing aid. But I mean, even Biden's own constituency sees it as performative. I mean, he's been lambasted by several members of the Democratic Party, members of Congress even, for the irony and the paradoxical nature in which you're going to say, we're airdropping, supply crates, and we're building piers, and we're doing that, but we're still kind of supporting what's going on in Israel. It's like the old meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's Max saying that, I'm playing both sides, so that way I always come out on top. The other thing, maybe not so much conspiratorial, but possibly another consequence of this, is that it may start to give credence to the fact that there's this weird dichotomy going on where the US is actually, in some ways, inciting a more strengthened and heightened response from Hamas, and by extension from Iran, to, because one thing that the US loves is kicking up conflict in the Middle East. They thought that they would just do that by being a ride or die for Israel, but now they're starting to see that Israel isn't necessarily as friendly with them as they thought, and that Israel, and Netanyahu's rhetoric especially, has been, frankly, pretty anti-American. Maybe not anti-American, but he definitely isn't too sweet on us. He's made it very clear that we are purely a tool to him, not necessarily an ally. And it would shock me in no way, shape, or form if this, aid to Gaza, aid to Palestinians sort of thing is a way of playing up both sides to ignite further conflict, so the US can scrape more off the top.
That's interesting. It also puts more pressure on Netanyahu, who has also lost a ton of public favor after the attacks at the music festival. Like, people were like, F this dude, he failed to keep us safe. So
now, wouldn't it be crazy if what happened was just a wild, rampant hypothetical that the US slightly contributed enough to the sustained conflict that it actually pushed Netanyahu out of the seat and something much worse took its place?
Yeah, I was wondering that. That's kind of like what I was alluding to, by putting more pressure on him.
Yeah, see, that's why I'm like, if we're going to put the tinfoil hat on, if we're going to go maybe a little conspiratorial, I think that the US might be trying to plant seeds of doubt in even their oldest Middle East ally. I know that sounds insane, and the reality is that it's probably not that, but for the sake of going down the rabbit hole, let's say Biden, because I think it was Biden says that he doesn't like Netanyahu, Trump doesn't like Netanyahu, I think even Obama had negative comments about his relationship with Netanyahu. He's not likable by any US politician, as far as I know. And it might be the US seeing an opportunity to push him out of the seat, and hopefully somebody better takes place, somebody more tenable to the needs of the United States.
Well, the guy that was actually useful and tenable to the United States, as well as had I guess some sort of working relationship with Palestinians, got assassinated, and then Netanyahu took over. So I don't know, man.
You know what's wild? Not to fixate on this too much, but I just happened to be on AP News' front page, and there was an article posted this morning as of 10 a.m. Pacific. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on Thursday called on Israel to hold a new election, saying he believes that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has lost his way and is an obstacle to peace in the region amid a growing humanitarian crisis.
Hey, the Simpsons, bro.
Shit.
The Simpsons, bro.
Holy shit.
We're the clairvoyants, not the Simpsons. Let's go.
We're talking about
Let's
it,
go.
and I see it on apnews.com.
That's awesome.
mean, come on. That couldn't have been timed any better. That's amazing.
All right. So now I'm convinced we're the ones predicting the future.
Exactly. Oh, we're about to get a lot more followers then.
Only if it comes to fruition, though.
True. I just a last point, kind of just to summarize my stance on it. My more realistic stance is I think Biden said what he felt he needed to say to gain sympathy from his constituents, but I don't think that for him specifically it goes anywhere beyond just a disdain for Netanyahu.
Gotcha. Now that we're taking a more grounded, reasonable approach, yeah. To keep going, because we got to wrap this up soon. Was there anything else, or was that it? That was
Nope, that was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the positives I did like, going back to the State of the Union for Biden, I did like him calling out Republicans on certain things that they have done in the past. I know that, don't get it twisted, I'm not necessarily praising him for sassiness, as they say, but it was nice to hear him call out the Republicans for their $2 trillion tax break that they gave to the wealthy a couple of years ago. He made a point to explain how that exploded the deficit previously, and he basically kind of called them out by saying, I know you guys are working on a bill to do it again, which kind of, like, all the Republicans were screaming that he was a liar, so it kind of put them in this position to where they either had to lie or they had to concede that, like, that's not exactly what they're doing or that's not what they want to do. So it's something I'm going to keep a close eye on over the next couple of years, just to see if they do actually pass it, because I would be curious.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, kind of a wait and see just exactly what happens as a result of it, but there's a lot of setting the stage for, potential surprises, but potential confirmations of things. I'm just in the wait and see moment, because it was a lot of them trying to appear that they were about to, bring forth all this greatness, and to me it seemed like that, that's what they wanted you to believe, whether or not it was actually going to come to fruition. So
I agree. He called out them multiple times. Going back to what you said, though, I just thought of this. So this is kind of a sidebar. I think the more and more since you've said this, I agree. The whole thing was really theatrical, because apparently Republicans had all agreed ahead of time to not stand up no matter what. And apparently Democrats had agreed ahead of time to stand up all the time. I don't know why that's just coming to the front of my mind now. I'm not altogether, because I'm still, on the mend, but
yeah, I mean,
it's frustrating.
I mean, even for me, the thing that was most front and center optically, as far as, painting the picture of the brokenness or the divide, all you have to do is look at, Kamala Harris and Mike Johnson sitting directly behind. You have your two leaders of the two different, essentially the two representatives of Congress there. And, I mean, I know that's not exactly how it looks, but it's basically what it's meant to resemble. And for every comment that Kamala is standing up and clapping for, all 6,000 of them or whatever it was, you have a smirk and a shaking of the head from your leader of the House of Representatives. It just, to me, it was so intentionally framed to make you feel a certain way, that it was hard to really take anything substantial away from it, because I couldn't really tell if what I was watching was House of Cards or if it was supposed to be reality.
Was there anything that you felt that Biden called Republicans to the carpet for that you appreciated?
I guess before I go into that, I will say that one little side note that I meant to mention before, as far as little things that a lot of Democrats really talked about that I thought was completely meaningless, and maybe you disagree with me on this. Is there a particular reason that Biden felt the need to Voldemort Trump by refusing to say his name? Is that like a known desire of his constituency that was like, oh, that's a big win for us that he who shall not be named?
That's hilarious. Voldemort him. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, the irony of that was that if that was your strategy, which was to diminish him, if you're comparing him to Voldemort, then we know that it has the exact opposite
effect.
So
100%. It
just kind
actually
of plays into my
yeah.
plays into my thoughts about it.
He kept calling him his like predecessor, right?
Yeah, I was like, why? Why are we feeling the need to be so? I mean, I know that he's been criticized, and I've criticized him in the past of harping too much on Trump, but simply saying my predecessor instead of saying Donald Trump doesn't change the fact that your entire campaign is predicated off of not being Donald Trump just because you didn't say his fucking name. It makes literally no difference.
Well, there's that narrative, that predominant narrative right now where like we're going to be under a dictatorship if Trump takes office. It didn't help at all that Trump, for whatever fucking reason, was like, you know, it's a good idea to have Viktor Orban come to my fucking house for a party. Like, bad look, bro. That dude's a fucking piece of shit. Like, why would you do that? Well, I know why you would do that, but it's just, it kind of fed that, like, oh, we can't give him any press, we can't give him any attention, we can't give him any of this. Like, I think that was like what they were trying to do, but like you said, I think it overwhelming backfire.
Yeah, I just don't see how anybody in the strategy room there thought that that was a good idea and they stuck with it. But every time I say that, Democrats keep coming out with these terrible strategies and terrible rhetoric. So, I mean, obviously their desires or their think tanks are not me.
Jesus, bro. Someone listening to us is going to think we're a bunch of conservatives.
I'm just tired of American politicians is really what it is.
True.
But I think that's most people, and they're just not ready to say it.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. Or they're halfway there.
Yeah, they're getting there. We're warming up to it.
I guess one of the pros, again, for me, one of the, like, just to give people something positive to kind of wrap up on, I did like him going back over the infrastructure bill that he passed. Even though I think there was much to be desired, he wants to expand on it. He wants federal funded projects like bridge repair and like other things like roads, things like that, to require American-built supplies and American workers. That goes back to the whole thing that I talked about in the very beginning about him wanting to rebrand America as like American manufacturing. You know, bring that back, resurrect that, what have you. But yeah, I don't know. I like the idea. I think some of the other rhetoric that he had leading up to that was problematic and kind of flies in the face of it. But like, what did you think about the infrastructure stuff?
I think it's important. I mean, I think it's interesting that the only thing that I didn't like about it is that it still came from like a place that was telling the world, telling the nation how he brought us out of COVID, out of a pandemic. And I understand all that and I get it, but I think for most people, it's been enough years now where we're ready to talk about future forward, not necessarily talking about what life is like post-pandemic. I think the pandemic is not the central issue for people anymore. I am, you know, as far as like, if we're just taking it at face value, fixating on, you know, improving American infrastructure and bringing America back into a heightened states of relevancy, especially within the, you know, the first world. I think it's incredibly important because I think it's something that we're lacking severely. Whether or not it actually comes through in any meaningful way is another, you know, that we'll have to wait and see. But as far as things to focus on, arguably I think he would have, you know, actually benefited from spending even more time talking about the specifics of that than talking about some of the other things that he mentioned. But yeah, at face value, I definitely think it was a positive rhetoric to go around.
Yeah, and just to be fair, if I'm choosing charitability, I think one of the reasons why they do harp on the post-COVID and coming out of COVID, how do I put this? I think that had like a long-term negative social impact on people, and I think people are still weaning out of that to some degree, maybe not even fully consciously. And it's also like, I guess Occam's razor, it's a re-election campaign. It's an election cycle. He's gonna highlight all the things he thinks he did well. But you know that. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that, and I'm not trying to downplay the long-term impacts of the pandemic. I just think that when it comes to the political mind of the average voter now, we all understand COVID happened. We all understand that we're recovering from it. We kind of feel as though we're recovered for the most part subconsciously, yeah, there are still elements. So I understand that it's rhetoric that's supposed to instill hope. But I think for me, my strategy would be more like, instead of using specific emotional triggers, I want to talk about how you're going to inspire the next 4 years. But again, I understand this is normal political practice. It's a re-election. I acknowledge all those things. It's just me specifically, kind of in my jaded, cynical way, with a greater desire to have rhetoric change around elections to be more, I don't know, to be more substantive, instead of being like, hey, you remember how we had a pandemic? Yes, of course, we all remember that. We appreciate that that's no longer happening. But I also feel like Biden's going to have a really hard time convincing people that he deserves the credit for that. So that's why I'm saying, instead of harping on that, move into what you're going to do and what you're going to bring to the table that we can get excited.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying that, like, remember, don't forget that people used 9/11 for 20 plus years. I don't expect to not hear about COVID for the next 2 decades.
I know. I'm just trying to jump ahead of it. I'm just trying to, if I can make them stop now, I would. But of course, I'm not expecting it.
I get it. To kind of keep it in line with building, one of the things that's kind of cool is he had mentioned a $400 tax credit, and over the next 2 years, if you're buying your first home or if you're trading up. He didn't really elaborate on that. I wonder if that will go to. I wonder if they'll make any exceptions for renters at all. I know a lot of people are renting because the house market is ass. He did want to do. He has an elimination of title insurance on federally backed mortgages, which I didn't fully understand what was being put forward, but when I researched it, if I were to just drill down to the bedrock, it essentially means that the way it'll be structured is you'll save $1,000 on refinancing your home, which is something. It's not a lot, but it is something. There are people that need to refinance their homes. He also did discuss renter protections by cracking down on antitrust violators and large companies that are buying tons of properties and driving up the rent. And then now, people, to incentivize people to build more homes and more rental properties, builders can seek federal financing to renovate like old spaces or build new ones, which was, I think, kind of neat.
Yeah, I think that there were elements to it that were promising. So as much as I'm harping on the fact that I don't think he did it enough, that doesn't mean that he didn't do some of it. And there were things that he talked about, like what you're saying, that I wasn't expecting to hear, and I think did end. I mean, overall, I think he did end on a very positive note, at least compared to how it started. And I think his sort of rallying cry at the end was pretty good. It was better than I expected, because it all sort of symbolically came around to the same idea. You know, he did a decent job of, once he regained himself from the detractors of, you know, addressing the Republicans, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes in the room, having a whole 5-minute deviation for the Laken Riley situation. I think his sort of closing notes, his last, 2 to 3 minutes, so to speak, were pretty strong. And it was interesting to see, because I've been told, as long as I can remember, that, Democrats and liberals hate families. So it was nice to hear a Democratic politician sort of subtly address that in a way that doesn't give Republicans ammunition, because there's nothing like a State of the Union from a Democratic president that isn't just direct ammunition for talking points for Republicans. But this was Biden actually demonstrating that there's a bridge here. We both want to have more healthy families. We want to encourage young people to be homeowners, business owners, business starters. And here's the groundwork for what I'm going to lay to help protect some of these things. The perpetuation of child tax credits, although the specifics on that some people really don't like. I think the idea that we're encouraging family building is kind of a traditional American value, as bastardized as that phrase has become, in a more positive light, because I think at the end of the day, regardless of which parties usually talk about traditional American values and family values, every politician needs to tell me how many kids they have every time they speak. It was kind of something I haven't heard from a Democratic candidate in a long time. And from, the incumbent president, I thought it was important that that was at least part of his fixation.
Yeah, no, I think that's really accurate, and I think that's a really good analysis. You're right. A lot of Democrats don't like rally around family. A lot of them are really about institutionalization, institutional education, institution this, institution that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, and not to go too off the rails here or go into a rant or anything, but what really strikes it for me, it strikes a personal chord for me, is it gives light to the fact that these are human desires that go outside of like traditional Judeo-Christianism. Like, it doesn't have to be a religious infrastructure that wants you to have kids. It doesn't have to be religion that wants you to have safe cities where you can raise kids and own businesses. Like, these don't have to be values that are strictly hoarded like freaking gold under a dragon's body. It doesn't have to be hoarded by Republicans and weaponized against their voter base. Democrats want families too. I mean, they may not want it in the same sense as like they don't want it for the same religious purposes, but it's completely asinine and always has been that the family values thing has been dominated and controlled by the Republican Party. This to me is a rhetorical piece that I think could be utilized more, because it also is something that Republicans can now no longer use against Democrats. So it's like one of their biggest pillars that they've run on. And if Democrats finally start realizing that espousing family values, protecting families, encouraging families is something that they now also care about, then it also takes a lot of punch away from their political rivals.
Sure, it's also a huge stepping stone and I guess leap forward for bipartisanship. Because even if you disagree on 90% of you can come together for the 10% that you do and work your way out to find resolutions for other issues.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I thought the last 2 to 3 minutes of the speech was actually by far the strongest part of it. But yeah, I think the ending was really good. It ended on a hopeful note. Whether it was as specific as I would have liked, I mean, it's a political speech, so it's never specific.
It has to be vague, intentionally, and broad.
Yeah.
The last couple things, like one of the things that I'm pivoting into is to keep it on track with children. He did say he wants to not allow child tax credits to sunset. He said that he wants to make sure that he starts a program to promote literacy so that every single child in America can read by 3rd grade, which I think is fucking awesome, and I don't know why we haven't done that before now. This will be, I think, interesting for you. He mentioned launching a climate corps. Framework, I guess, was based on the Peace Corps, but he wants to do something that has more younger people active and taking control of the future of the world. So I think that you'll probably like that. And then when it came to healthcare, he said that he was kind of pandering to the middle class a little bit, but he said he wants to again raise, or I guess lower, I guess would be the better word, lower the cap on prescription drugs again, and kind of expand the Affordable Care Act that he had, which I think is always cool. And then he wanted to launch a women's health research initiative, and he dedicated $12 billion to invest in that. I don't know what that entails, and you already know me. It's kind of like the two-way thing, like I'm clawing to know more. I need to know more about what we're doing. If the women's health research initiative is to measure like the need for women's health care and why women should have their rights back, I'm all for it. Let's fucking go. But if it's just some frivolous fucking thing, then I can think of a million better things to put $12 billion into.
I mean, if things do end up coming to fruition and they're not a dangled carrot, so to speak, then awesome. So, I have to give him credit for at least bringing it up, because at least as of right now, we can't just assume that these things are false promises. So let's just assume that what he says is what they plan to do. A lot of it sounds good. A lot of it sounded good. The climate core thing, yes, I'm definitely interested to see the specifics on that. My opinion of how Americans have handled, climate policy is iffy at best. So if they were to actually do something substantive and create a coalition that we're able to send people around the globe, which is something that I've always felt was pretty important, if it was to manifest in the same way that like Peace Corps would, I'd be all for it, as long as we were bringing, tenable, tangible solutions across the globe using the US's overabundant resources to do so. I would be thrilled if that actually manifested in that way. I'll remain cynical as always, but because I don't have proof to believe anything otherwise right now, I'd say there's a lot to potentially look forward to.
Yeah, I think a healthy dose of skepticism is good for everyone. And it also kind of holds their feet to the fire. Be like, oh, like this is great, so prove it. That was pretty much the long and short of it. Everyone knows, like, other than the things that we brought up, it was resoundingly politics as usual.
No, I mean, again, it's a speech, as I said before, and we'll say at the end, it was a speech. It was a political speech. It had a lot of the marquee essences of typical political speeches, which was use people to tug at the heartstrings. Are we actually doing anything substantial? Well, that remains to be seen. There was a lot of things that I didn't expect, certain things that were called out or, spoken to that I wasn't expecting to be addressed. So in that regard, it's a positive. But again, the healthy skepticism is where I'm going to stay, because politicians have always said a lot and done a lot less. So we'll see.
I guess we will. All right, for anybody that's watching on YouTube, leave us comments. Tell us what you think, whether we're insane or whether we're Democratic shills or Republican shills or whatever kind of box you're going to try and put us in, which neither of us fit into. If you like the content, obviously give it a thumbs up, share it. Even if you disagree with us, if you hate us, share it. If you love us, share it. Both of us work. We're working full time. We've both been sick, so I apologize if I can't speak for him, but for me, I'm a little frazzled and I'm not as put together as I'd like today. So we appreciate your patience. Is there anything you want to close out with? We're hoping to do this full time, so all the support that we can get helps.
Yeah, the only closing comment that I would have related to content, thing that we didn't get to that we originally maybe wanted to at least touch on or mention, for folks that are interested in any follow-up from the State of the Union, I strongly urge you to look up Alabama Senator Katie Britt's response video to the State of the Union if you want to see some of the most shocking heartstring attempt propaganda that I've ever seen in my life. Again, it's not really something that we touched on, but it's a wild 17-minute or so ride of how, like, one representative of the Republican Party, the GOP, is responding to the State of the Union. It's caused a lot of discourse since then, so I strongly urge anyone to check that out. And also, for anyone, as much as we like to be able to summarize, please feel free to watch the entire thing. I want to make sure that people are exposing themselves to the content in its raw form, and then, have your own thoughts, develop them. Like Skill said, please make sure that gets permeated in the comments. We want to create a community that is openly discussing these things, the good, the bad, the ugly. That's what we're trying to do here. So we want people to have all the access to the same information we do, and then we want to talk about it with you. So please, let us know what you think, one way or the other. We just want to have the conversation started because we feel that that's kind of the foundation that we have to build on.
Absolutely. And you know what? We can even bring up the Katie Britt thing at the very beginning of next week, because she also had a follow-up interview about it, and I know there's going to be more. So...
Oh God! And there's something tells me this is going to be a thing for at least the next month.
At least we'll get good memes out of it.
Of course, and that's all it's really about.
Of course. All right, everyone, take care.
Yep. Goodbye, everybody. Stay safe. Try to do something every day that makes you feel like you learned something, and don't be afraid to talk to people.